after a long few weeks where I got a little bit distracted, we're now reaching the end of our journey into a Tudor marriage. So you found the right person, you've negotiated the marriage contract, you got permission from all your friends and family and your boss. There's just that one thing left. The wedding ceremony itself. There was a great deal of flexibility to the Tudor couple as they pondered their floral arrangements and their catering options. They didn't have to face the global wedding industry as we do today. Oh, well, we have to hire the superhero-themed photo booth, provide 6 different aquafaba macaroon tiers for our centrepiece, book the floral arrangement of hothouse orchards, squeeze in, the small amount of 500 guests who've RSVP'd, and then there's dress fittings, while I'll be reminded that as a bride, my every waking moment must be spent losing weight and being so utterly miserable that the actual wedding day will pass by in a haze spoiled by Ed Sheeran. The wedding planning guide I was given that says that allotted time for weigh-ins so that I could track how much weight I was losing. But the wedding ceremony as a concept was changing and solidifying over the course of the 16th century. Marriage defined life for people in Tudor England. It was a public and private activity that defined your passage into being a full adult in the eyes of society. At the start of the period, a not inconsiderable number of couples didn't even have a formal wedding ceremony. Living together and being perceived by the local community as being married, that was enough. You're married. If people think you're married, then you're married. But the Reformation brought a cultural change to the idea of marriage and specifically weddings. For a start, marriages were registered from 1538, so all marriages were recorded down so people could see what's going on here, who's doing what, what's the what. Under the Protestant regime of Edward VI and the broadly Protestant rule of Elizabeth I, there was a push to regulate marriage, so you could still have a ceremony outside of a church or at your home, but there was a distinct change in the understanding of marriage. A wedding that did not take place in a church or in the presence of a priest was inadequate, deficient. Are you trying to hide something? Avoid the law? Scandalo. Marriage was an act that belonged, to the big G upstairs, to God, and therefore it should be celebrated solemnly at church. A church is an ideal place to have custom, convenience, law, religion, all together. It's a big party. And removing the barriers between God and lay people, which was a key principle of reformist Protestant belief. A wedding ceremony should bring the community together in church, under the eyes of God and the minister. And there's the legal side. The laws of matrimony prior to their 18th century reforms were extremely ambiguous, pretty complex, not quite very formal. So there was a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of disputes, there's a lot of, am I actually legally married to you? We're not sure. A public ceremony in a church is something that you can't deny. You can't walk back from, you can't claim it never happened. So they become seen as a necessity for behests, for wills, and for property inheritance. A wedding ceremony cemented the formal alliance of two families and brings together a community in celebration. Feasting, drinking, dancing. You've got people who are now friends. They've got connections. You can relieve a tension in the parish. You can provide an outlet that were otherwise unacceptable in everyday life. There's a good long history of eating too much, drinking too much, and getting yourself into serious trouble after a particularly fractious family wedding. Now, with all the boring cultural and social considerations out of the way, let's talk about the fun stuff. Well, fun when you're not part of the industrial wedding complex, that is. Wedding planning in the 21st century is not fun. It is made of pain and capitalism. Before those things existed, if you're a Tudor bride or groom, what does your wedding day look like? in the 16th century, it's no longer fashionable to just decide that you're married to someone. So, you've got to do a little bit of pre-gaming before you have your ceremony. One of the first things a couple has to consider, or have to consider when you are engaged, is what is your wedding day? What is your wedding day? What's your wedding day? It's what everyone will ask you, and you will hate them for it. With 20 to 30% of Tudor brides being pregnant on their wedding day, time's of the essence here, and there's a distinct regional variation as to when a Tudor marriage would take place. The stage of your life, the season of the year, and the church calendar all dictate the actual day you can pick to get married. So the year-long cycle of religious rituals meant there'd be plenty of days when you just couldn't get married because it's a holy day where everything's forbidden. You can't get married on a holy day because you can't have sex on holy days, and to make a marriage stick, you've got to have consummation. So you can't get married on a day where you can't have sex. That's just a no-goer. Once you've crossed out all the holy days from the list of potential wedding days, you need to consider what the farming is like in your parish. You need to bear in mind when you actually have a free day that you can give up for a wedding, and then you're going to need a whole day. A wedding day's got to be penciled in around the carving, around the lambing, around the harvest, around the seed sowing. When are you going to find time for the ploughing, if you know what I mean? Ploughing is a really serious part of the rotational crop system, so you've got to spend a long time doing it. In pastoral areas, you tend to get married in the spring. In an arable area, you tend to get married in autumn. Urban weddings are less seasonal, but they tend to be held around sort of the beginning and end of the working year, where you have those big servants' fairs, so presumably when people are hooking and meeting up. Once you've set the date, it's time to contact your tailor or ask around your family to start preparing what you're going to wear. Now, let me get on my pedantic high horse when it comes to talking about bridal fashion. No, white is not the ancient symbol of purity and virginity. It's a mythology that has been completely made up. White does not connotate those things. As I'm sure you've heard many times before if you do history, white was not the required colour of a wedding dress until Queen Victoria decided to wear white for her wedding day, and white became the trend from the 19th century. There were white wedding dresses before, but it wasn't as solidified as a cultural object as it is now until Queen Victoria. And if we're going to get into the history of colour symbolism, blue is actually the colour of virginal purity because it's the colour of the Virgin Mary. But, the point is, there are no stupid colour rules about what you should or should not wear on your wedding day that will mean bad luck for you, or that he's going to die, or that he's going to cheat. No, sis. That ain't happening. None of that is the case here. What Tudors wore on their wedding days were their best clothes. Whether it's in white or not. Probably wouldn't own a lot of white because it's not a very practical colour. Wealthier couples would, of course, spend lavishly on their clothes. They'd get all new duds, look all fancy, because, you can't celebrate your love unless you're crushing the faces of the poor. But even the lowest sorts in society would try to get something, at least a little bit new, whether it was borrowed from a friend, refurbished from something they already had, or a gift from an employer or a godparent. New shoes, especially, and fresh clothes marked a new beginning. And you're starting your married life, you've got to start out with something with a new beginning. The outfit of the couple and their guests would often be decorated with bridal knots and ribbons, which you can also give away as gifts to those who attend the ceremony. What's next on the list? Yes, a ring. Did Tudor couples exchange rings at a wedding ceremony? Yes! Rings have been used in weddings in England since at least the Iron Age and were seen as powerful romantic symbols. Rings were a sign of love and commitment, the 15th century manual Dives and Pauper stating that the ring is round about and hath no end, in token that they love should be endless and nothing depart them but death alone. Richard Hooker described a wedding ring as a special pledge of faith and fidelity, nothing more fit to serve as a token of our purposed endless continuance in that which we never ought to revoke. Henry Swinburne, an ecclesiastical lawyer, described a wedding ring as signifying the perfect unity and indissoluble conjunction of a married couple, that their mutual love and hearty affection should roundly flow from one to the other. Wedding rings contained so much folkloric symbolism that they were used in magic rituals to drive away disease and the devil. As now, a wedding ring went on the fourth finger of the left hand. This was where the vein of love was supposed to run. So putting a ring on this finger on your vein is a display of continuous flowing love. A wedding ring was also a sign that a woman had a proper married state, that it's an open symbol of the change from being a girl to being a full woman in society. A ring could be simple or elaborate, modest or expensive, with many couples probably just using the rings from their courtship or when they got betrothed, because, why do you want to buy another one if you've already got it? Court musician Thomas Wythorne commissioned a ring for his prospective bride in 1569 with the words, "The eye doth find, the heart doth choose, and love doth bind till death doth lose." Not every couple used a ring. Really strict Protestants refused to wear rings, as they saw them as a popish, idolatrous symbol, and of course the very poorest in society would have found a ring beyond their means. And the next big thing, the flowers. A Tudor bride wouldn't necessarily have had a big bouquet like brides often have now, which is very wasteful. Buying flowers is very carbon intensive. Don't buy them. But depending on seasonal availability, fresh flowers were used as decorations. They emphasised a marriage as a festive, fertile, romantic occasion. Brides wore floral garlands. They carried nosegays, which were like little bouquets. And flowers would be used to decorate the church, the tables for the wedding breakfast, and for the wedding bed. Daisies, violets, pansies and roses were common favourites, with evergreen rosemary and myrtle favoured in colder winter months. Myrtle, in particular, was associated with the goddess Venus, and roses were used to symbolise silence. So I guess it's supposed to show that women should be silent in marriage, which is... Rings, wedding day, wedding dress, the flowers, that's all the big things done. Well, aside from deciding who to invite and letting them know when the wedding day's coming, you can't just text people and be like, wedding day today, Facebook event, Facebook event. Oh, can you imagine anything worse than a Facebook event for a wedding? Ugh. Personally, the less family members attending an event with copious amounts of alcohol and long periods of time where they have to talk to each other, the better. But it's a personal choice, I suppose. To have a wedding ceremony, a couple legally had to have the banns, a public proclamation of an intent to marry, read out by a priest on 3 consecutive Sundays before the ceremony would take place. For most couples, that would definitely let everyone that they knew know that the ceremony's coming up, because you only live in one place your whole life. Well, yeah, having it said in church kind of is everything you need to say. But for wealthier couples with far-reaching friends and networks of alliances to maintain, they might be in a position of having to commission someone to write out and send some fancy written invitations, not dissimilar to now. So, dress and invites out, it's time for the ceremony itself. The big day starts with a procession of the bride, with everyone coming out, collecting her from her house and bringing her to the church. It was a custom to marry in the parish of the bride, which may or may not be the same as the groom, and the procession would be as grand as the couple could afford. Thomas Deloney described a fictional procession in his book The Pleasant History of Jack of Newbury. She was led to church between 2 sweet boys, with bride laces and rosemary tied about their silken sleeves. The one of them was son to Sir Thomas Parry, the other to Sir Francis Hungerford. Then there was a fair bride cup of silver and gilt carried before her, wherein was a goodly bunch of rosemary, gilded very fair, hung about with silken ribbons of all colours. Next there was a noise of musicians that played all the way before her. After that came all the chiefest maidens of the country, some bearing great bride cakes, and some garlands of wheat, finely gilded, and so she passed into the church. A wedding belonged to the community. It's part of the life of the parish. It's to be shared and observed by all members. Dancers and musicians singled out the event as a rite of passage and let everyone know your social standing. Shut update on Facebook. Clearly, if you're being followed by a full string orchestra, you're probably pretty important, while others might have to make do with their uncle banging a drum. It was a requirement that marriages had to take place between the hours of 8 and 12 in the morning. A ceremony has to take place in daylight, during canonical hours, so the couple could not be accused of getting married clandestinely. Also ensured that you have to follow the ever-changing religious laws around marriage because, well, the whole community's getting you married. Although, if you wanted to marry in a ceremony not in favour with the current ruling regime, sneaking to church at the break of dawn was often a good way to avoid people noticing your true ceremony. Having the wedding in the morning leaves the afternoon and the evening open to allow plenty of partying and the all-important wedding consummation. Now, when it comes to discussing the ins and outs of a Tudor wedding day, a distinction must be made. The Reformation radically changed the Tudor wedding day, so a line in the sand must be drawn. Firstly, the pre-Reformation wedding day went thusly. The couple would be processed to the church door. That's right, most weddings actually take place outside the church itself. The church porch was where the sacred and the secular intersected, perfect for a wedding that is both spiritual and social. So, the child of an earl can be married just below the chancel, and a knight can be married inside the door, but all us lot got to make do with the church steps. The groom would stand to the right, and the bride to the left, as women were formed from the rib on the left side of Adam. On the steps, the priest would greet the couple, get paid his fee as he did so, and ask 3 times if there are any impediments to marriage, because a marriage has to be made with free consent of both parties. As long as no one was coming in to rush in with a last-minute objection, the priest would then ask for the bride's dowry, which would be publicly displayed and exchanged with the groom. The freely given consent of the couple would be asked, and if they were willing to proceed with the ceremony, it would continue. The bride was given by their father or an adult male guardian to the groom. Whether this is a symbolic transfer of authority or a public indication of familial approval, it's hard to say, as the Tudors thought both and didn't quite agree on either. Richard Hooker approved of the custom as it putteth women in mind of a duty whereunto the very imbecility of their nature and sex doth bind them, namely, to be always directed, guided, and ordered by others. Puritan minister Richard Greenham also called it a laudable custom in the church and a tolerable ceremony, both to show his authority over her and to witness his consent in bestowing her. What can I say but yikes? The couple would then take careful hold of each other by the hand. If she be a maid, let her have her hand uncovered. If she be a widow, covered, and let the man hold her by the right hand in his right hand. The groom would then say to the woman, I take thee to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forth, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, till death us depart, if Holy Church will it ordain, and thereto I plight thee my troth. The man then withdrew his hand, and then the woman takes it again, and she says, I take thee to my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forth, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, to be bonair and buxom in bed and at board, till death us depart, if Holy Church will it ordain, and thereto I plight thee my troth. The ring would then be produced, to be blessed and sprinkled with holy water by the priest, so that she who will wear it may be armed with the strength of heavenly defence, and that it may be profitable unto her eternal salvation. The directions for the ring are very precise. The man shall take it in his right hand, with his 3 principal fingers, holding the right hand of the bride with his left hand, and shall say after the priest, With this ring I thee wed, this gold and silver I thee give, and with my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly cattle. I thee honour. And then the bridegroom places the ring upon the thumb of the bride, saying, in the name of the Father, then upon the second finger, saying, and of the Son, and then upon the third finger, saying, and of the Holy Ghost, and then on the fourth finger, saying, Amen, and there let him leave it, because in that finger there is a certain vein which runs from hence as far as the heart. Now that everyone's cold and bored outside, a blessing and a prayer could take place inside the church. Now you're allowed in. When there was a marriage before Mass, the parties kneeled together and had a fine linen cloth, called a care cloth, laid over their heads during the time of the Mass till they received the benediction and then were dismissed. Finally, with all the prayers done, the bridegroom shall receive the pax from the priest and convey it to the bride, kissing her. And the final instruction is, neither the bridegroom nor the bride are to kiss anyone else. Party poopers. No polycules in my Tudor wedding ceremony. The fact that they have to specify that tells me that there used to be a lot more kissing at Tudor weddings. This order of service changed when the Protestants attacked. The Reformations of Edward VI and Elizabeth I drastically changed the structure of the wedding day. Anything seen as unnecessarily popish was thrown out, and instead the day is based around the more egalitarian tenets of the Reformed faith. No social distinctions here. The wedding group gets married inside the church. The service is to be performed in front of the whole congregation as integrated into routine worship. The clear rules on where brides and grooms should stand have been thrown out the door, although the custom still remains, as it does now. The brides and grooms still stand in those places. The minister would ask for any impediments. If any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter for ever hold his peace. And if there are no objections, the minister asks the couple whether they would take each other as man and wife, forsaking all others as long as you both shall live, because freely given consent is important. Once they had said, I will, the minister would ask, Who giveth this woman to be married unto this man? Which required no actual answer, as the minister receiving the woman at her father or friend's hands shall cause the man to take the woman by the right hand, and so either to give their trust to the other. There's a lot of hands in this ceremony. Then would come the vows, and they've been rewritten slightly. Now, marriage is sealed according to God's holy ordinance, and the vows were, I, take thee, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, to love, to cherish, till death us depart, with the woman making an additional promise to obey. A simplified version of the ring ceremony followed, because that's a long deal. There were none of those blessings or ritual fluffery to be found here. The groom would promise, with this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. The ceremony was complete, as the minister pronounced, Those who God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. The marriage was then proclaimed, Forasmuch as and have consented together in holy wedlock, and have witnessed the same before God and this company, and have therefore given and pledged their troth either to other, and have declared the same by giving and receiving of a ring, and by joining of hands, I pronounce that they be man and wife together. The ceremony would take about 10 to 20 minutes, unless followed by a sermon or communion. There's also no official kissing allowed, but, well, that's a custom that has also managed to stick around. If you had absolutely no money, no social standing, and you lived on the margins of society, you're probably not going to be able to afford a church wedding, because you do have to pay for it. So for those on the very edges of respectability, there was the alehouse wedding. That's right, it's happy hour and a wedding all rolled into one. They were convenient, they're convivial, they're free, and you might even be able to get the local priest, after he's had a few. It's that sort of ceremony.
I, Edward Cullen.
I, Edward Cullen.
Take you, Bella Swan.
Take you, Bella Swan.
To have and
After any wedding ceremony comes the after party. This was, and still is, called a wedding breakfast. This was a meal that would literally break the fast of the bride and groom. In a pre-Reformation ceremony, remember they had mass at the end, and to take the sacrament is impossible unless you fasted all day, which is another reason why weddings take place in the very early morning, because you don't want to wait around for your lunch too long. Even before going to church, most wedding parties were already pretty drunk. Remember that procession I talked about? Well, if you're going to be dancing in the street and playing instruments really badly, or doing Morris dancing, generally being drunk makes that easier. It was a common complaint of Puritans. They make rather a May game of marriage than a holy institution of God. Thomas Gattaker thought wedding guests too often succumbed to looseness and lewdness, and too easily fell into filthy discourse and obscene songs. The celebratory nature of marriages was defended by other religious figures as had not Christ himself graced the wedding at Cana and contributed to the revels by turning water into wine? Yes, I think. I don't know the Bible. That was more than enough justification for a good party that might last up to a week. The Bachelor's Banquet described a wedding party as an occasion for gadding, wantoning, feasting, drinking and flirtation, proving that very little has changed over the centuries. Back to the wedding feast, taking place at the family home or, a location like the local tavern, wedding feasts were as indulgent as possible on the budget available. The feast would include a number of aphrodisiacs or just food or concoctions or things that could be made to have a shape or had a shape that you could associate with sex. That's the joke. It's very funny. The groom would serve the bride, carve her meat, attend to her plate, pour her drinks as an inversion of what they were supposed to do. He'd give her plenty because a hunger for food was seen as a sign for hunger for other matters. Food served at a Tudor wedding feast might include chestnuts, pistachios, pine nuts were all said to increase the libido, and there'd be lots and lots of meat, just hot meat everywhere, as it was believed to heat a man's blood, so provide energy and fuel for lots of sperm. That's the point of a wedding day, is to get to the consummation. Phallic-shaped food such as asparagus would be an additional treat, as well as ones that could be made into sexual puns. And here's an example of the Tudor sexual pun. You would have lots of apricocks at your wedding feast because it sounds like cock, and also it's got like a little cleft in it, so it looks like a lady parts as well. Ba-dum-bum! Presents would be given out. So you've eaten your pistachios, your hot beef, your sausages probably. That is a pun. Presents. Now it's time for the presents. One writer described how invited guests do assemble together and at the very instant of the marriage do cast their presents, which they bestow upon the new married folks, into a basin, dish or cup, which standeth upon the table in the church, ready prepared for that purpose. But this custom is only put in use amongst them which stand in need. A poorer couple might be given gifts to start their home, so furnishings, cutlery, pots, pans. A richer couple would get fine plate and jewellery. A couple that seemed to be in real financial straits might have a community put together something called a bride ale. This was a custom where family members would raise money for the couple by brewing, or baking sometimes, a beer or a cake or a bread, and asking neighbours, you have a drink and then you give us some money towards the lucky couple. It seems like a nice tradition. Is everyone coming together to prepare them for the best possible start in life? But the tradition, which was very associated with monks and monasteries and the Catholic Church, started dying out by the end of the 16th century and didn't last beyond the first few decades of the 17th century. And I think it should be brought back. Put my face on an ale. Jess's ale. The feast was ended with the presentation of the bride cake. So this isn't exactly like a modern wedding cake, which are just those stacks, fruit cake. Why fruit cake, the worst of cakes? Just a sad cake. No, a Tudor bride cake is a stack of cakes, small cakes all piled on top of each other, and the wedding couple, for luck, kisses over the top of them. And I think sometimes they also get the cakes thrown at them, depending on what kind of ceremony you're having. But the focus isn't on the cake or the dance or the feast. The most important part is waiting now. Formal bedding. Even after all of that, after the church service, the procession, the feast, the wedding day, you don't need any of that. The wedding, the marriage is not legal and binding until there's been some consummation. So the wedding party, as the things are winding down, they gather together and they process the bridal couple all the way to their formal wedding bed. For the aristocracy, where marriages might happen at a very young age, actual technical consummation is put off until physical maturity. So in cases of the very super rich, the consummation is met by putting them in a bed together and having them, touch their feet together or something. That's consummation. There you go. Give them a clap. Let's put these children back to their actual beds. An adult wedding couple would be taken to bed by all their friends and family who make sexual jokes at them and say like, oh, this is coming up, way, and then shows them the marital bed. This bed would be decorated with ribbons. It's covered in flowers, scented with violets and essence of jasmine, just to put you in a lovely, loving mood. And pre-Reformation, the bed is also blessed and sprinkled with holy water by your priest, who's also there, locking eyes with you from across the bed. This is all to make sure that nothing is going to put off the groom. So even though he's had a very, very large meal, he's had a lot to drink, he's being formally undressed by, like his mum and all his aunts and all his family. No demon is killing his boner. Nothing, we're making sure that nothing is killing that boner, because it's got to go into something today. Then, after you've been undressed by your relatives in a small room while you're piss drunk and everyone's laughing at you, the couple are then given a special fortifying drink to warm the blood, to relax the bride, and to embolden the man. Because after all, after this day, I think most of us would be going, no, not quite feeling it, but now you have to have a special drink that puts you in the mood. Sack posset is made of wine. What they call sack, we call sherry. So it's got sherry in it, it's got cream, it's got nutmeg, it's sugar, there's cinnamon, lots of egg yolks. So once the couple have been forced to drink the wine and egg drink, so their friends, the last thing to come off, so you've already been put in your nightgowns, the last thing to come off, the friends would remove your stockings to play a little game. So in the 21st century, we have the custom of the bride throwing her bouquet into the crowd for people to catch. A Tudor bride would be in her bed, all the family around her, new husband here, and the game here is that your friends have all balled up your stockings, which you've been wearing throughout all this very long day, must be quite stinky, and the aim of the game is to throw them in the bride's face, and whoever hits her in the nose, they're the one who's going to get married next. The couple would then be left alone to let the magic take place. Although, not really left alone and not really in peace. Sure, no one's in the room watching, which a lot of period dramas seem to have. There doesn't seem to be any sort of people sort of like watching things take place. But music will be played for you throughout the night and into the morning, right outside your room. As the couple formally leave the room for the in the morning, yeah, everything's happened. The musicians play your way out. They've been playing for you all night long and they're greeting you in the morning. And then you would go out and you'd find that the party wouldn't have stopped. It would have carried on throughout the whole night. They put you to bed, they put the wedding couple to bed, and then the guests just sort of wait outside, carrying on the party, hopefully still there and not in any trouble. Court records show that Tudor weddings didn't always have the best endings. Something about spending, days and days drinking doesn't encourage people to put on their best behaviour. In 1572, Robert Brown of Leighton, Essex, was charged with allowing dancing in his house during a church service, but he explained that it was a wedding day and he could not rule the youth. Henry Grey of Southfield, Essex, was cited for practising his dancing during sermon time and for dancing the Morris home with the bridegroom after a wedding service. John Wilkins, a parish clerk, was cited for going about in the street in woman's apparel. His explanation was that at a marriage in a merriment he did disguise himself in his wife's apparel to make some mirth to the company. So, there you have it. That's your full guide to attending or hosting a Tudor wedding day, both pre and post-Reformation. What's remarkable is how many elements have stuck as part of a traditional British wedding ceremony to this day. You got where the bride and groom stand, the ring finger, the use of flowers, a cake, a great big party, the kiss at the end. Stands to reason we should bring back some other elements too. How about being walked to church while beautifully serenaded by bagpipes? Or having your first night together as a married couple serenaded by bagpipes? Or just having every moment of your life narrated by the transcendent music of bagpipes? I swear I had a point there. Somewhere. Anyway, if you'd like your wedding consummated to the sound of bagpipes, give this video a like, a share, a subscribe. Keep me growing and sharing long content about the Tudors. You can give me a donation at the Ko-fi link below to keep funding my research and my content, or browse through my wish list for research materials I'm looking for. Of course, if you have ideas or access to anything you think I should read, please feel free to send me a message and we can sort something out. What? So, don't include that. Very embarrassing. Whoa!